Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much for coming to this presentation of Twiplomacy. So what is Twiplomacy? Is the contraction, of course, of Twitter and diplomacy. It's a pet project of mine which I started before joining Burson Marstella 2.5 years ago at the World Economic Forum, where I looked at how world leaders use Twitter, because quite a few of them were coming to Davos and they were on Twitter. Thanks to Burson Marstella, this has become a study. This is the third edition already. We started in 2012, looking at heads of state and heads of government and foreign ministers, how they use Twitter. We're mainly looking at Twitter. We're also looking at their Facebook accounts and Google Plus presence and YouTube presence, but mainly at Twitter, because we believe Twitter over the past 3 years has really become a tool for digital diplomacy and 21st century statecraft. So what this study is about, and today I've also focused it more on Europe, on European leaders, it's about connections. So first of all, a couple of 83% of all governments in the world now have a Twitter presence, either with the personal accounts of the president and the prime minister, or the institutional accounts, or we have the foreign minister present. You can see this is a shot of the 25 best connected accounts, and what you can see is really concentrated in Europe. European leaders really use Twitter to connect. We have 163 heads of state and government on Twitter. 90 foreign ministries and 65 foreign ministers have personal accounts. And what this study looks at is really the connections between them. Not necessarily, who has the most followers, but how are they connected with each other? So for those who are not familiar with Twitter, I guess very few, of course, if you follow someone and that person follows you back, you're mutually connected. You can send each other direct private messages. Now, we don't know if this happens on Twitter between heads of state and heads of government and foreign ministers, but we, with the Twiplomacy Twitter account, are regularly in contact on Twitter via direct messages with senior world leaders, or at least their social media teams, which I think is quite amazing. So if that happens to us, it probably happens also among them. So this year, Laurent Fabius, the French foreign minister, has become the best connected world leader in so far that he has 91 mutual connections with the 650 other accounts that we have identified. In second position, like last year, the European External Action Service here in Brussels, and Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt, who dropped into third position. I have to say, Carl Bildt tweets personally. It's really himself who writes the tweets and posts them, compared to Laurent Fabius, who has a team who's doing the tweets for him. It's also his team which started to reach out to his peers. Third and fourth position here, the EU Commission, and then the French Foreign Office. I have to note the Russian Foreign Ministry also has 66 mutual connections. Compare that to Latin America. The best connected foreign office or world leader there is the Foreign Ministry of Brazil, followed by the Foreign Ministry of Peru, and then the Prime Minister of Haiti, Laurent Lamotte. His team was really using Twitter to put his country on the map, and the Foreign Minister of Panama, and followed by the President of Colombia. So I've also decided to look at the European leaders. We haven't included Martin Schulz in this study because as I said, we're only looking at heads of state and heads of government. But Martin Schulz, with his campaign account, has 51 mutual connections. So he's right in the top 10 there. Also, Herman Van Rompuy, over the past years, he's made 30 mutual connections on his Twitter account. So José Manuel Barroso, a bit less, only 19, and our new president of the EU Commission has only 6 mutual connections so far. This will obviously change once he takes over, that office. But it's just to give you an idea. Now, what do they do with on Twitter? There are amazing Twiplomatic exchanges. Here is one just a couple of days ago from the French Foreign Ministry, which translated a French tweet from Laurent Fabius into English. It was just before the France-Germany match, of course, the French-German friendship, till the game at the Maracana Stadium tonight, with hashtag transfer by the Steinmeier of the German Foreign Minister, and Allez, to which the German Foreign Office replies, dear Laurent Fabius, especially today, long live the Franco-German friendship, but tonight we will win 3-2. The French stayed more diplomatic and said, well, it will be the epicenter of the French-German friendship, may the best team win, and then the German Foreign Office offering that, in the finals, our team, our Mannschaft will represent France as well. Don't know if that went down very well. Of course, you might think this is anecdotal. It is in a little bit, but it is actually really interesting to see the connections here between the two foreign ministers. Franz-Walter Steinmeier does not have a personal Twitter account, and how they can publicly make these exchanges. Actually, there's a whole collection of that we did, how world leaders reacted to the football World Cup over the past 3 weeks. Really interesting to see that. So they do mention each other. There are also more serious tweets about politics. One thing which is quite interesting is a term which has come up is hashtag diplomacy. This is the foreign minister of Slovenia. He put the hashtag right on his hand. Hashtag end violence. That was a campaign the foreign ministry sponsored. Now I think this is a really good use of visual pictures, which always increases. Actually for public figures accounts, the use of pictures will increase the retweet rate by 60%, so that is quite high. So hashtags were used this year quite effectively. This is the hashtag United for Ukraine. I don't know if you've seen this. This was started by the US Secretary of State and the team there, Jen Psaki, the spokesperson, and also the ambassador in Ukraine. Now, this was not an isolated incident. Actually, this was a coordinated hashtag campaign with Western allies. They basically coordinated with Sweden, with the UK, with Finland, and with the Italians, and many others, to use that same hashtag, United for Ukraine. What happened then was that the Russians saw, of course, this hashtag campaign and said, hang on, we will use that hashtag too. And the Russian Foreign Ministry actually did tweet 200 times their position using that same hashtag. So it was really the first time that there was a hashtag battle. In terms of retweets and reach, probably we've looked at it just for the leaders. They had more, the Western leaders had more retweets on the United for Ukraine hashtag than the Russians, but this is really interesting how, a hashtag can really be divisive and also be used by both sides. So then we also have selfies. I don't know if you know this person. This is the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak. Not only does he like selfies, he does post selfies every time he meets world leaders. So here he's with the Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan, with Barack Obama, and Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, and he actually takes these selfies himself. So we can think about selfies whatever we want. I personally think this is much better than a handshake picture. So because you see quite a few official accounts, you always have handshakes, but he's not the only one. I know this famous selfie in the European Parliament here by Viviane Reding. And just a couple of weeks ago, a couple of days ago, it was last week, the Swiss government is, we have 7 federal councillors, and only one of them is on Twitter, and this is Alain Berset, he is the head of the Department of Interior, and they have their annual outing. Guess what he did? He basically took the first government selfie, and all the 7 federal councillors are in the picture, including the Chancellor, that's the number 8 there. She was cut off, you can obviously, Chancellor Casanova. So he didn't realize that this was, actually this is the first government selfie where you see all of them combined. As I said, the study is not really about the number of followers, but you know, we do have this slide about, yes, who's the most followed. It is Barack Obama, 43 million followers, with the Pope on all his 9 language accounts, 40 million followers. And then this slide is already outdated. Just last week, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi overtook Susilo Bambam Yudhoyono and became the 3rd most followed world leader. Narendra Modi has done an excellent digital campaign, election campaign, and his account is growing exponentially. He's over 5 million followers now. And in 5th position is the White House, which was beaten on the day, which Modi overtook on the day we launched the study at the end of June. So much for the number of followers. What we also find very interesting, this was confirmed also last year, is that African leaders really use Twitter to be conversational. So what do we mean by conversational? They start, or 95% of the tweets of the Ugandan Prime Minister start with an @reply. An @reply is a public-private reply. It doesn't really show up on the main page. You have to click on tweets and replies to see all of them. 95% of his tweets are just thank yous to his followers or niceties with his followers. The president of Rwanda is a bit more outspoken. He actually confronts his critics on Twitter, and he doesn't shy away from a Twitter spat. He had quite some interesting Twitter spats, including with Mia Farrow and also the head of Human Rights Watch on his Twitter feed. But the use of Twitter as a conversational tool is very interesting. Also, Rafael Correa, the president of Ecuador, very conversational, and the Foreign Minister of Rwanda, and also interestingly, Erna Solberg, the Prime Minister of Norway, there in 5th position. Lastly, the most active world leaders are the Presidency of Mexico and the government of Mexico. They're sending over 70 tweets a day. Over 70 tweets a day. So I thought, what are they tweeting about? How can they be so prolific? And I looked at their Twitter feed. Actually, their Twitter strategy is very simple. We're repeating our tweets several times a day, or several times over several days during the week, because the half-life of a tweet is an hour and a half, 2 hours at the maximum. So if you repeat it, you get more eyeballs. So that's what they do. Their tweets are always retweeted. Hence this figure. It sounds funny, but apparently it's working. They do have incredible numbers of followers, but I would not recommend this. But interestingly, Spanish language accounts are all very, very prolific. Also, the presidency of the Dominican Republic and the presidency of Colombia and Venezuela are very, very active. So this Twitter strategy of repeating tweets, some US bloggers do this. They tweet a tweet or a link to the same story 4 times a day. It seems to work. Lastly, a slide on when did they start tweeting. There's only very few who set up a Twitter account in 2007, namely Barack Obama, because his account is actually a campaign account, clearly designed to win the elections in 2008 and to win the elections in 2012. His account is followed by 220 other world leaders, but guess what? The White House does not follow Barack Obama. The White House is legally not allowed to follow Barack Obama. There is a clear separation. The White House will not mention Barack Obama. There is a very clear separation between the campaign account of Barack Obama and the White House, the account which is funded by the US taxpayer. I find this very, very interesting, how there is absolutely no connection. The White House can't even pick up the phone and say, hey, why don't you retweet us on the tweet? And if you look at the Barack Obama account, it is clearly geared to a home market, to an American audience. It almost never tweets about foreign affairs. So very, very interesting, that clear separation there. You can see basically Twitter has reached maturity among world leaders in 2020, 2011, and 2012. A couple are still signing up this year, mainly just looking at Europe. There's only one country in Europe which does not have a Twitter presence. It is the tiny city-state of San Marino. The government there has no presence on Twitter. And in Latin America, it's only Guyana, which is not present. Everybody else is where Twitter is not really used is by the island states in the Central Pacific and also in Asia and also in Africa. But African leaders are present more and more. This is kind of here a slide just with the continents and the institutions. Lastly, so this study is available on Twiplomacy.com. You have the executive summary, and I invite you to look at, we have country profiles for every single country with, the Twitter accounts of each country. And for the continent pages, we've now introduced, and we'll introduce that for each country page, a live visualization of how they tweet. And I think this is something really useful. We're still refining this. Of course, you can see here the most followed accounts being the papal accounts here for the Euro page and also the Prime Minister of Turkey, Erdogan. But you can see that in real time the trending topics. So yesterday, this slide was taken yesterday. You have hashtag Ukraine, of course, but also the EU CEO hashtag, which I find quite interesting because in real time we can see what are the main topics that the governments and world leaders are tweeting about. Here, this is for the continent, so it's not only the EU, but it's the entire continent, but also then we will see that for the different countries. Thank you very much. With that, I hand over to my colleague Marek, who has a brilliant well, how can I say this? A brilliant presentation on the European Parliaments on Twitter, the new one. Mark has been slaving away to look at all the accounts of the candidates.
It's a team effort.
Yeah, it was a team effort. So Twiplomacy is really looking at how world leaders tweet. Europe Decides is, you're probably familiar with this blog, really looking at how the European institutions use digital and, not only digital, but also how politics are run here, and it's a great source. Actually, I want to say, Twiplomacy has a Twitter account at Twiplomacy. I'm very proud I have 20,000 Twitter followers, but when I looked at the account here at Europe Decides that David and his team are doing in terms of tweets, how often a tweet is retweeted, because that's actually the measure of influence. They have 7,000 followers, so only a third, but actually they're more influential than the Twiplomacy account because they get more retweets per tweet. Maybe lastly, this is something, it's just one measure of influence. If you look at Barack Obama, he has 43 million followers. When he tweets, his tweet is retweeted 1,400 times, 1,400 times. When the Pope tweets something on his Spanish account, it gets on average over 10,000 retweets. So the Pope, who has only a third of the followers, is much more influential than Barack Obama. And I think this is something. Next time you look at followers of your boss, says, why do we only have a couple of hundred? Give him that retweet number because that might be impressive. Anyway, Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so basically this year there are social media elections which have been discussed all over the world. One of them was here in Europe, and one of the discussions was that the next European Parliament would have more MEPs on Twitter than ever before, and Twitter would be more important than ever before for members of the European Parliament. So basically we wanted to take a look. So now we've got 570 MEPs on Twitter. That's not 570 accounts. Some MEPs have 2 accounts. That's 570 MEPs on Twitter, and that's up from about 400 in the last Parliament. And about 46% of those accounts are tweeting mainly in English. That tells you a little bit about how those accounts are being used. If the account's tweeting in the MEP's native language, then quite often that's in order to speak to constituents. If it's mainly in English, then quite often it's for those policy discussions. There's conversations with journalists, other MEPs, those people who are within Brussels and engaging them on particular policy issues. And the other important thing is that they are active. Over half are tweeting at least once a day. So basically, just to make the point clearly, these are not accounts that were just set up for the elections. So Nicolas Sarkozy came under a lot of criticism because during the elections he was active, well, his account was active, but then straight afterwards it died out. This is not the same for the MEPs. Their accounts have been set up for some time. 125 of them were set up more than 5 years ago. And so these are mature accounts, these are experienced users, and of course those who are not on Twitter are continuing to join. So if we can take a look, we can see that Paulo de Castro was the first adopter. He had an account back in October 2007, so that's a very early adopter. And then the last one, at least when we ran the numbers, the last MEP to join was Silvia Godin. She joined July 1st, I believe. Okay, so why are MEPs using Twitter? It's a time-intensive activity. Quite often they're running the account themselves and not handing it over to their teams, their assistants. So it takes a lot of time. So what are they hoping to achieve from it? Well, one of the things is legitimacy with citizens. It's about transparency. When they're using the account, they're basically able to, in a public forum, for all to see, show not only what they're doing in their work, but also to share their opinions, their thoughts, and have those discussions online for all to see. I put cheap in inverted commas there. The tool is obviously free, but it's not cheap in terms of the amount you invest in effort in it. It takes a lot of time, and if you're looking beyond the MEPs, but for instance at the political groups, a lot of money also goes in investing in having good teams managing the account, and there's a lot of work on promoted posts, etc., etc. So that's why it's in inverted commas. But in principle, it's a cheaper tool than, for instance, trying to have across the board advertising media coverage. And of course, it's direct. And there are discussions taking place on Twitter. Now, while of course in Brussels many important decisions are taken behind closed doors, not for people always to have every tit for tat, although for instance it was interesting to see the Greens live stream their conversations with Juncker earlier this week. There are many things that do take place on Twitter. There are many conversations which are taking place, and unless you're part of those conversations, basically you're losing an entire medium. It's one medium. There are other mediums as well. There are the columns in the tier 1 media. There are obviously the other forums for debate. But it is an important media, and it is important to be able to influence those discussions that take place there. So just take a look. It's not Twitter is not the domain just of those on the Eurosceptic groups on the far left. This is something that is seen across the board. So we can see that, for instance, EPP has almost as many as percentage of its MEPs on Twitter as, for instance, GUE or EFD. So it's something that's in the mainstream as well as on the edges of the parliament. We've taken median number of followers for a particular reason. There are some groups that have MEPs with very, very high follower accounts. What we wanted to show here was that the Greens in particular have done a lot of work on making sure that all of their MEPs are active and using Twitter to its full potential. You can see the same with some of the other accounts. So the point is that it's not just one or two social media celebrities. Across the board, the ones with the larger circles here are the ones that are really making sure that all of their MEPs are trying to engage and develop a strong audience for them to communicate to. Just to give you an idea of who are those celebrities though for each group, the most followed MEP is Pablo Iglesias with over 450,000 followers. A lot of his followers were developed, his account really grew during the protests in Spain. So that's one of the reasons why that account was so popular. Other accounts, perhaps it's very understandable why they have large followings. Perhaps it's also useful looking at it from a country perspective. This is not the full results. The full results can be found on our website. We have a full infographic for it. But just to give you an idea, there are some countries which have 100% across the board MEPs on Twitter, such as Sweden, Malta, almost the case in Netherlands, and other countries where perhaps the tool is less used, such as Hungary. But just in general, we're seeing all of these countries slowly making greater use of the tool. And the reason is, once again, it's not just a tool for speaking with constituents, it's also a tool for conversations here in Brussels. So even if, for instance, Hungary does not have, or Czech Republic or Slovakia don't have as much social media usage within the country, it's still not a reason for MEPs to join Twitter and find it a useful tool. The other interesting thing to note here is that in Germany, traditionally, Germany has been one which has not seen as many politicians using the tool. Angela Merkel, quite famously, is not on Twitter. However, this is changing, and more German MEPs, at least, are on Twitter. Okay. This is a map that was developed by the University of Vienna, just showing the conversations that took place around the European elections, and more importantly showing the best connected users within those elections. And the reason I wanted to show this slide is once again to show two things. One is that there are definitely language groups, so while on the one hand, yes, MEPs are often tweeting in English, at the same time they do come from a local context. And so the people that are influencing them and that are influencing the conversations that they want to be part of operate within national context. So it's important, and they obviously find it important not to forget that. But at the same time, you have this centre which is influenced by Anglophone media. The centre here is made up, with the light blue, is made up of commissioners, of EU media, such as Euractiv, for instance, and they bring together all of these disparate language groups together. And because the language is English, and because of the influence of British media, actually, on Twitter at least, the UK is right at the heart of Europe. Okay, Matthias already mentioned one of these numbers. There was a study done, I think it was just over a year ago, by Twitter, looking at different sectors, within those areas, in those conversations, generated the largest number of retweets. And this one was for politics, governments, politicians. As we can see, photographs are likely to create almost 60% more retweets than a tweet without a photograph. The other important one to note there is hashtags. Numbers, so digit there, is actually, it doesn't create that much more of a engagement than others, which perhaps is counterintuitive in some ways. So what kind of photos are MEPs sharing? Well, there are a variety of images. Sometimes they're sharing images of them signing pledges, showing them at their daily work. Sometimes it's sharing infographics. These are very, very popular. Certainly enjoyed sharing them on Europe the Signs because they get a lot of coverage. And sometimes they're taking the format of traditional advertising. So you've got there a poster from Guy Verhofstadt from during the elections, or just after actually. We're basically talking about his candidacy for the Commission President, and it's very much taking the old format, the one that you might expect to see on within a magazine or perhaps on a billboard. There's one which is of Roger Helmer sleeping. There is a lot of commentary that goes on. Actually, that one was actually tweeted as well by himself. It wasn't the original one to tweet that, but he tweeted it himself as well. So it shows that these conversations go two ways, but there are other famous images, for instance, UKIP not being there to vote on a particular issue, so empty seats. The imagery is used to make very clear political messages. but not all MEPs. Some are still new users and aren't used to the platform. So every so often you get an interesting mistake, like a photo being published upside down. Okay, so on hashtags. So I wanted to test the theory of hashtags generating more engagement. So this was for the Eurovision Song Contest. One of the things which is important particularly for those working within Brussels, is to get the message out to a broader audience. There is a lot of criticism for being stuck within a Brussels bubble, and the need to really go out and speak to audiences which perhaps are not following the same policy issues, that perhaps aren't so interested in who the next Commission President is, but they are interested in perhaps their favourite TV show. So a lot of candidates, this was, I think it was May 10th, I think, so during the European elections, a lot of candidates were using Eurovision as a way to reach the voters. And this was very effective at generating a large amount of engagement. So if, for instance, we take Sky Keller, we can see that 28.4% of her tweets are normally retweeted. However, for all of her Eurovision-related tweets, she was retweeted 64.5%, so more than twice as much. Giles Goodall, similar sort of numbers. There was slightly less than twice, and similar numbers for Federleber. And there are some just numbers on the average number of retweets for those. The similar picture was for across the board for all of the candidates who were tweeting. I chose these particular ones because they were tweeting more than any others. Yep. So where do we go from here? So a lot of the questions are, okay, so the MEPs on Twitter, maybe they're even tweeting themselves, but maybe they're not going to see my tweet, because actually, if you look at particular issues, so be it BPA in baby bottles, be it the bees, be it the e-cigarettes, there is so much activity going on. I mean, the MEPs were basically spammed with thousands upon thousands of tweets. And this changes the dynamic, because on a particular crucial issue, it means that it's no longer so easy for a constituent to send a message to an MEP to say, this is something I care about, I want you to deal with it. Actually, if you're getting thousands of tweets, there's very little way of you being able to manage that, certainly not on an individual basis. Some of them may be able to work out tools for getting the overall picture, but that could be skewed. So this is one thing which a lot of MEPs, not all of them, especially the ones with smaller followings, probably won't have the same issues, but it will be something that over the next few years, MEPs will have to deal with. How do they deal with very high-profile issues when they just get far too much activity for them to handle? And one of these issues, maybe TTIP. So we can see that during the elections, it was very, very important to the candidates. These are just an array of tweets that came from different candidates. So Alex Stubb was running as a candidate. Obviously now he's no longer an MEP, but this just gives you a sample of the kind of things that were being said. And the question is, if this discussion really kicks off, how does that change the policy debate? Because if you remember, on the slides with the median number of followers, you actually see the Greens as having the largest number of median followers. The Greens are very, very sophisticated digital users, not just on Twitter. Online, across social media platforms, they're very, very sophisticated. And that means that they're able to punch above their weight. So they may have a small number of MEPs within the parliament, but if through their social media outreach they're able to gather very, very large-scale public interest from across Europe, that could change a lot. And so there is a question mark. Can a small party change discussions, which it shouldn't really be able to change by the amount of votes it got during the election? I think that's it. Yeah. Obviously, all of our information is on the Europe Decides blog, and we tweet about it from Europe Decides.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthias and Marek. We've now got about 20 minutes for questions, discussion, comment, should you want to have questions and discussion. I'll take 2 or 3 in a row. One here. Okay, go for it.
Hello everybody, I'm Bella Monesco. I work for the European Commission on social media, and I wanted to ask your opinion on the most efficient ways of interaction on Twitter, and whether regularized engagement opportunities help the credibility of the accounts. Meaning, say we organize a chat every week, or the MEPs at your disposal this Saturday and next month, or what works best according to your research. And I take the advantage to announce everybody that tomorrow we will be having a Twitter chat on TTIP with TTIP.
Thank you. Hold that thought for a minute. Have we got any more questions from it? Got one at the back and then John there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tamira with One Campaign. I was wondering if you have looked into what kind of tweets that MEPs retweet themselves. Is there any trend there?
I have a technological question. It's relating to Mark's point about kind of MEPs being totally bombarded. What technology are they using in the main? Do we know that, in the sense that they're doing it from laptops, tablets, smartphones, out? How are they integrating it into their everyday lives? Because I know that from some good MEPs, but is there a technological challenge, i.e. getting around the European Parliament's IT in order to manage to be able to tweet more efficiently?
Great. Matthias.
So I start with Dana's question too. I think these Twitter Q&As, scheduled chats, are really good because you can channel the conversations with, if you have somebody who's high profile, you can't be answering every single tweet all the time. So it's good to schedule Twitter Q&As. I do like them, and also it does not always have to be the top boss. Like Barack Obama, for example, he uses the White House account. Does a quick Twitter Q&A. He gets thousands of questions. It defeats the purpose because he can't answer all of them. So what they do is they will have senior directors answering specific issues. In your example of tomorrow's chat is a specific topic. It's really good. I think it's good to frame the debate on certain issues every now and then. Replying when there are questions, it depends on the staff. Is somebody there to manage this? Because once you get about 50,000, 100,000 followers, it is quickly it becomes very difficult to handle. But I'll hand over to Marek.
I would agree with all of that. I would also add that timing is very important. So you've got to look at not only your own internal timing, but also the timing of when are other people interested in the topic. So you've got to look at other news flows, other times in the calendar when you really expect people to be having an interest. It makes it much easier than trying to develop that interest from scratch. But yeah, if you have more resources to put at it, then the more responses that you give to each individual question, the better. But it's a question of resources. The more you invest, the more you have. In terms of the next question.
But I think that answers did that answer your question?
I think he's retweeting himself.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
In terms of what MEPs are retweeting, there's such a diverse group that I must admit I have not looked at each individually. It really depends on the style. Some of them are very good at promoting the interest that they care about. So if they see a particular cause that they really think is a worthwhile cause, they'll be retweeting it and pushing it and promoting it. For other people, it could just be a lazy way of tweeting, basically. But there is no sort of consistency across the board, and I wouldn't expect there to be sort of any consistency in the future. Where I think retweeting becomes a bit more of an issue, but not as much as one might think, is for the official institutional accounts. One of the things that I was surprised at actually is the freedom that a lot of the institutional accounts are given in their use of social media. But there they are a bit more limited in what they can retweet and what they are able to promote, because there is that element that they're representing an institution rather than themselves individually. In terms of what platforms MEPs are using, it really, once again, it depends on the MEP. Some of them are doing it on their iPhones, and it's actually interesting looking at committee meetings when you know, they're there instead of listening to what the other MEPs are saying, their colleagues are saying, they're there on their phones, on their iPads. When it happens on a platform such as websites, it's normally a clue that they're not doing it themselves, but it's their assistant. So if they're doing it from a mobile device, it tends to be a good indicator that, well, it's not 100% clear, but it's a better indicator that it's there.
The assistant's next to him.
Okay, thanks for that. Two here, and then one at the back. Yeah, you first.
You're first.
All right.
Maggie Sekari from CEFIC. I'm interested in the connectivity of MEPs and European institutions. So you said that there's a big difference between followers and connections. So who do MEPs tend to follow actively? Do you have an idea?
That's a good question. Come back to that in a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, Matteo Ricci from the European External Action Service, Strategic Communication. Marek, you mentioned the Green Group example. Do you have any specific or a factual example of actually that strategy working? Like you have less MEPs, or you don't have a big political group, but at the same time, through social media, you're able to influence the conversation. Is there any example of that already happening?
Good question. Yeah.
Marco Ricardo from the European Commission Social Media Team. One question about the most followed leaders. I think one of them was the Indonesian Prime Minister. In 2013 and also in 2012, most of the new Twitter population came from the Gulf and from Indonesia. We know that more than half of that population is fake followers that then can be sold. Do you plan on making, it's just a fact, do you plan on making a study on how many fake followers leaders get? I'd like to do it. I think it's an honest question. First question. Secondly, in the report there is a part on, I think it's called connected leaders. Connected, yeah. What's the point of making that study? Because basically it's a study of how people follow each other, but you know, hardly I would say that people send direct messages. World leaders send out. So sometimes it's almost a matter of courtesy. I'm following this leader, or I'm following this institution. So what is the point of, maybe I'm missing something, that's what I'm asking, what is the point of making a study on connected world leaders?
Well, I think that this is really interesting, these connections. If the Israeli Prime Minister follows the Palestinian government, and the Palestinian government doesn't follow him back, I think there's a very clear statement there. Okay? That's what we find in the study. We have the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, who's following a number of world leaders, and especially since he was elected, he followed Shinzo Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister, who followed him back. Abe Shinzo didn't follow anyone before. So there's a very clear connection between India and Japan. There are reasons why that is really where Narendra Modi is focusing his foreign policy. He's not following the White House. He's not following John Kerry, who's following him unilaterally. So I think there's so much you can read into these mutual connections. And the best example, of course, is coming back to Barack Obama, 43 million followers. He's following 650,000 people because he had auto-follow on in the beginning. So if you were on Twitter in 2007, you would follow Barack Obama, he would follow you back. That didn't mean anything, and he's following 650,000. He's only following two other world leaders. The Prime Minister of Russia, he followed him when he was president, now he's only Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister of Norway, Erna Solberg, she signed up early, followed Barack Obama, and they're mutually connected. He's not following any other world leader. He's ignoring the Canadian Stephen Harper, he's ignoring Enrique Peña Nieto in Mexico. I mean, these are neighbors, and everybody else. He's ignoring 220 other world leaders who follow him. If there is not a clear message there, it's basically the message there is Barack Obama as a campaign account, we're not using this for international communication. The State Department last year did not follow any other foreign ministry, except they followed only number 10, the British government. Well, since September 2013, when the Iranians started to reach out on Twitter, the State Department decided to follow a number of foreign ministries. Not really. I don't think there was a clear plan to which they would follow. It's not just G20 or G8 or G7, but it's more or less haphazard, and they follow the Iranian foreign minister Zarif unilaterally, and they follow Hassan Rouhani, the president of Iran, unilaterally. What does that mean? Very clear. There is the first step to re-establishing diplomatic relations, and that goes through Twitter. So I hope I've convinced you of the, this is what we really, want to look at. Coming back to fake followers, yes, fake followers is a problem. I don't think we can say that some, maybe some, we've seen some embassies and some people buying followers, and you can see that in the growth curve. You have large accounts which have a big number of fake followers, but that is because these bot accounts will want to be legitimate by following legitimate accounts. So apparently, Barack Obama has quite a few of these bot accounts, and also probably Indonesian president and the Prime Minister of India. But it's really hard to identify, what are really these spam accounts. And through direct messaging with the European Foreign Ministry, they said, oh, by the way, last night we had 600 new followers, all fake. And they sent me a screenshot of the fake followers. Now, I haven't followed up. I didn't ask, what did you do? Did you block 600? It's time consuming anyway. On the one hand, it's nice to have 600 more followers. On the other hand, they're not engaged, they're all fake. So it's not really their fault, but they had a good laugh about it.
So, Marek, who do MEPs follow, and the political influence of smaller groups through digital?
So I'll take the MPs following, but basically there was a mapping also done by the University of Vienna earlier this year, which showed who the old parliament at least was following. The followings were very much as you would expect by party groups. So EPP MEPs will be following other MEPs from the EPP, etc. Where I think the picture starts becoming more complex is then when you look at the broader context in which they operate in. The image I showed earlier on shows that, for instance, a lot of the mainstream MEPs are very well connected with each other across the national boundaries, but the Eurosceptics, that they're not so good at connecting with each other. Maybe you can make something out of it on that, maybe not, but MEPs do tend to follow each other if they're from a similar sort of background.
But do they follow outside of the close circle of MEPs?
It depends on the MEP. Some of them follow very few, a lot of them follow an awful lot of people. It really depends on the account. In terms of an example of a smaller party carrying influence above its size, I think unfortunately the example is the EFDD. The groups like UKIP are very, very successful at using social media to get large amounts of followers and to get large amounts of traction with the broader electorate and then have that converted into tangible results. So yes, I think there is that example, and I think you'll see more of it too.
Thank you, Marek. One more question here. That's going to be the last question.
Can I?
Sorry. Do you want to come back on?
No, it's actually another question.
Your question, and then back to you, and then that will be it.
Hi, Amy Collins, also from the European Commission social media team. I have a question about institutional versus personal accounts and what your views might be on that. Because if you take something like from 10Gov or White House accounts, obviously they're kind of limited in what they can say, a little bit more than maybe David Cameron is because of a political account or Barack Obama. But obviously there's a challenge for institutions who have people coming in after the elections that have personal accounts that are maybe very popular but also very campaign related, very political, and whether or not those accounts are the ones that should continue as they speak for the institution. And do you have views on whether a personal account or an institutional account can be more successful? Do you think we should go more in the direction of personal accounts or establishing a good institution?
Very timely question.
Actually, I have two small questions. The first one, Matthias, you mentioned that, for instance, the U.S. State Department started following leaders in a sort of a random way, as far as I understand. So I would like to understand, is there a strategy behind the use of Twitter, the use of social media, or do they have just a simple numbers of rule, or it's probably just random? How do you perceive it? And the second question is about trolling, because this is probably the part I'm most interested in, and I have two very good examples at the EAS. When for 2 months we were suffering a campaign from activists about South Sudan on our Facebook account. We would receive 10,000 of messages per day. Well, not as many, but a lot of messages. And we didn't know what to do, because of course it was just extreme trolling, and we decided not to reply because that would probably open doors to an endless conversation. And some other times, like today, we posted a photo, picture on Ukraine. Crimea is obviously in the picture, and we receive a message. Why is Crimea in the map of Ukraine? Well, because legally speaking, it is still part of Ukraine, and we don't recognize illegal annexation, of course. So we have this question: should we engage with what is trolling, or should we just leave it there?
I think just leaving it is probably sometimes the best approach. But sometimes maybe where you have to engage. It depends on how big this campaign is. I had my fair share of hashtag spam and campaigns. Sometimes you think all the world knows about it, but guess what? It's probably only on your page you realise what's happening. So. There is no golden rule. I know that, for example, the Indian Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, blocked quite a number of accounts on Twitter. So that was a huge issue. People had been blocked on Twitter by the PMO India account, so the official account of the government. And then, with Narendra Modi coming in, they unblocked all of those. So is that the right? I think it's not the right way to handle that. But your first question was
about the strategy.
The strategy. So basically, the State Department, as far as I understand, they have 200 people on the digital strategy, and it's not only Twitter. It's huge. The State Department, it goes well beyond Twitter. But Twitter is one of the channels, I think, where the State Department is probably not as advanced as other foreign offices. Mainly why you guys are doing a brilliant job, and also the UK Foreign Office, just managing all the different diplomatic network, having all the embassies on Twitter, and also then encouraging each ambassador individually to be on Twitter. And that brings us to your question, personal or institutional account. I am in favor of a personal institutional account, and I'll give you one example: is the Pope. That will grow over time. With the next Pope coming in, and we've seen the handover of the account. And no, it's not the Pope tweeting, it's not his personal account, although, he's quite open. But, he comes across, the account comes across as really the voice of the Pope. The UK government account is quite interesting. It was set up under Gordon Brown. And the tweets under Gordon Brown were very conversational. Gordon Brown never touched the account. It wasn't him. It was the guy on the social media team who took liberties to reply to people. Since David Cameron has come on board, he changed the account because the account avatar was number 10, just the 10 of the door. With David Cameron, it became the picture of the Prime Minister. So he kind of personalized the account, which is the official government account. And since last year, he has his own campaign accounts set up by the Conservative Party. So I do think in the States, the division is very, very clear, and for legal reasons. But I think it would be a good way to separate the campaign account, which the party can run it, or the office holder can run it himself if he wants to. But no staffer paid by taxpayer money should run that. Grow his Twitter followers, and tweet for him. So I think we'll come to that in a couple of weeks.
We're
already coming to it. What will happen to who will run these accounts? Juncker EU, is that a campaign account and that will go dormant when he becomes head of the Commission, or will the EPP continue to fund it and to run it? These are all questions that, or will he tweet himself? But should really a European, a staffer from the Commission paid by the European taxpayer run that account?
I know we're jumping around here, but I'd like to sort of just actually go back to the trolling. One of the interesting things with the trolling around the Crimea-Ukraine issue is the sophistication of it. A lot of them are not just sort of simple eggheads tweeting at you or engaging on a Facebook account. A lot of them are very well connected, very sort of influential in their own respects accounts. So I would really turn the question on its head. Really, if the aim is to try and influence those who are on the other side, those who are within Russia, who may only get access to state TV and Russian perspectives, really the question should be not so much how do I deal with trolling. I think there are methods. You perhaps, you post one reply and then point everyone to it. But the question should really be, how do we go out in the Russian language onto Russian social networks and really take the debate over there? Because at the end of the day, these opinions are not just the opinions of one or two individuals, it's broadly held opinions, so it's very important to be able to engage with those and to take the arguments back rather than just trying to decide, well, do we leave it or do we respond to this particular post? In terms of the personal versus private, if for instance you look at the presidencies, if we, every single presidency of the EU Council starts afresh, starts anew. The Lithuanians then took their account as their own sort of representation account, but effectively you're losing the ability to develop a channel to communicate with the rest of Europe, and for me this is something that's very important. These channels should be developed so that that particular rotating presidency has more meaning, has a powerful tool at its hand. So really for me that's something where you should hand it on to the new user. Similarly, you can ask questions like, for instance, well, Ryan Heath is never going to give up his Twitter account, but at the same time you would ask, well, would he have had as many followers if he didn't hold the position that he had, and how useful would that particular account be to the next spokesperson in that particular role? I think one way or another a decision has to be made, but when you've got someone who's using it as skillfully, as for instance Ryan Heath or some, more importantly, some of the commissioners, then that's really what matters. You can have a personal account, but if it's not being used efficiently, then it really doesn't matter that you've got someone's face on the front of it. What really matters is that it's engaging, that they're really trying to have those conversations and to give it that personal touch. And then what happens at the changeover, well, one way or another decision has to be made. I think in certain cases it really should lean on the side of this belongs to the institution and not to the, well, I'm going to go with the presidency because I think that's a safer bet.
Okay, thank you very much, Marek. Thank you everybody for coming. Just a few concluding words. You're probably all familiar with Europe Decides. I'd just like to publicly thank David O'Leary, who stood over there again. And if anybody wants to talk about Europe Decides, speak to David because it's very much his masterpiece and he's the person behind it. Thank you, Matthias, thank you, Marek, for your performances today, and thank you all for coming. I think we need to thank Matthias and Marek.